we would be restricted to them all.
Right.
It's not like we have to pay from this every semester, but if we happen to pay from there. And
Well, I asked Claire to send me
Go ahead.
You see
this whole screen.
and we can compare.
That's as big as we get it, huh? All right.
How that
I guess so.
annual
All right.
ebook royalty stacks up against what we did in the past.
That's what it looks like.
Now, as far as, okay, I guess when they join, well,
Yeah,
whenever they
what
talk,
you- what you
whoever's
said
talking
is
will
that
take the screen.
It automatically flip, won't
It
it?
should.
Yeah,
We were
that's what I
getting
thought.
royalty checks
Good.
Good to go.
pre-audit, of course it does right now.
Hey, we all remember to silence your phones in case you haven't already. Appreciate it.
And again, let's try to get as many people on this side of the room before
Yep.
we fill those chairs up. Just so you.
And Ryan, you mentioned the financial aspect of it.
Just silent. Yeah, just make sure. You gotta hang out back there on Robin Gibbons and I'll be like, oh, it's true.
So,
Okay.
be careful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right.
Is it picking up too much or?
No, I'm just saying, just so you all know.
So I'm not over there growing.
Well, that or, you know,
Having private
you have to
conversation.
have a private conversation, yeah.
Sure, I'm giving away trade secrets about.
Right.
Is there a front runner so far? The handbook? Yeah, that's gonna be a big change. We've been a wholly owned subsidiary. Hey, guys, if y'all could kind of fill up this area first. It's on camera a little bit better. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you. We still got a few minutes. Okay. Talking. Yeah. Hey, just a heads up before we get started, we're gonna have a Q&A after he does his reading. We appreciate it. If you have a question, you can ask a question. It doesn't have to be a complicated question. It can be just who's your favorite writers, or how did you get started writing, or anything along those lines. So when you go to it, you'll just raise your hand. You have a mic. We'll bring it to you, and you can just, you know, the camera will kind of zoom in on. So if your camera shy, I understand that kind of thing. But we really appreciate it. If you did have a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand. So we'd like to get about 20 or 30 minutes worth of questions and answers if we can get them. So we really appreciate it.
This is it. It's going to be the largest.
We're doing all right.
Schedule popped up with the freshman and advisory committee. That was supposed to be today.
This one different.
All right, guys, it's 11. I think Ross is just now joining. Hey, Ross, how you doing? It's Jason from this morning.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Can you say something? Can you speak a little louder for just a second?
Yep. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you see the room all right?
I can, yeah. It's great.
All right. So welcome to Southeastern Louisiana University. Everybody in the room this is kind of a very small version of what we typically do. We usually have about 300, 350 people at one of these types of events, but since we're doing virtual, we've opted for a live stream today to broadcast you and your work to everybody who's been reading it today. So just to give you a sense, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids that have been reading the Book of Delights from students here at Southeastern and then students enrolled in our dual enrollment program. So just to kind of give you a sense of the audience that's potentially out there either watching live or going to be watching the recorded version of this later today. So
Great.
all right, so I'm going to do a brief introduction and then I'll turn it over to you. And then when we're done, we'll have some questions for you.
Excellent. Sounds good.
All right. So, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the Spring 2022 Common Read. This is our 14th year of doing the Common Read. And Common Read is sponsored by the English Department and the Writing Center. I want to welcome all of the students here at Southeastern, students in our dual enrollment programs, and everybody who might be watching this on our live stream currently right now. Some of our traditions have changed over the years. Typically, we would fill the halls with a lot of student artwork and different kinds of interpretations of the Common Read author's work. But unfortunately, we're not doing that today, but we do have that artwork posted on the English department's Facebook page and Twitter page. So you are welcome to go check those things out, and Ross will send all that stuff to Vaughn so that you can look at it later today. So before we get to Ross Gay's reading, I'd like to read just a little bit about him. Most of this information comes from Ross's website, which you can check out at rossgay.net. And I just want to read a little bit about his biography. So Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry. The titles are Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, Beholding, A Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. He's the winner of the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. His collection of essays, The Book of Delights, was released by Algonquin in 2019. His most recent book, which I'm looking forward to reading, is called Beholding. It's a book-length poem, 86-page poem on the legendary basketball player, Dr. J, Julius Erving. It was published by University of Pittsburgh Press and released in September of 2020. Ross is involved in a lot of other projects with other people. He's a co-author with Amy Nezakumathil. They are the co-authors of a chapbook called Lace and Pyrite, Letters from Two Gardens. He's also the co-author with Rochard Werenberg of the chapbook River. Founding editor with Carissa Chen, Patrick Rosal of the online sports magazine, Some Call It Ballin', in addition to being the editor with Chapbook Press's Q Avenue and Ledge Mule Press, a nonprofit free for all food, justice, and joy project. And then he also works on the Tenderness Project with Shayla Lawson and Essence London. He's received fellowships from Cave Canem, the Bread Loaves Writer Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation. And he currently teaches at Indiana University. And I really like what Ross has written about himself at the top of his biography on his webpage, so I want to read this as well. This is in his own words. Ross Gay is interested in joy. Ross Gay wants to understand joy. Ross Gay is curious about joy, and Ross Gay studies joy. Something like that, as in his words. So, so for you guys, I hope you have a wonderful time with your experience with Ross Gay today, and I will turn it over to him.
Great.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's really good to be with you. Hopefully in the future, in person, but for the time being, this is how we're doing it. And I'm just going to read, I think, a little bit through the book. So I'll just kind of, I might flip back and forth, or I might just move through it. But I'll read for about 40 minutes or something, and then we will have a conversation, if that sounds good. For those of you who haven't read the book, I think maybe most of you have, but I'm just going to read the preface today, because I do think it's kind of an interesting way that this project came to be. One day last July, feeling delighted and compelled to both wonder about and share that delight, I decided that it might feel nice, even useful, to write a daily essay about something delightful. I remember laughing to myself for how obvious it was. I could call it something like the Book of Delights. I came up with a handful of rules: write a delight every day for a year, begin and end on my birthday, August 1st, draft them quickly, and write them by hand. The rules made it a discipline for me, a practice. Spend time thinking and writing about delight every day. Because I was writing these essayettes pretty much daily, confession, I skipped some days. Patterns and themes and concerns show up. For instance, I traveled quite a bit this year. I often write in cafes. My mother is often on my mind. Racism is often on my mind. Kindness is often on my mind. Politics, pop music, books, dreams, public space. My garden is often on my mind. It didn't take me long to learn that the discipline or practice of writing these essays occasioned a kind of delight radar. Or maybe it was more like the development of a delight muscle, something that implies that the more you study delight, the more delight there is to study. A month or two into this project, delights were calling to me, write about me, write about me. Because it is rude not to acknowledge your delights, I'd tell them that though they might not become essays, they were still important, and I was grateful to them. Which is to say, I felt my life to be more full of delight, not without sorrow or fear or pain or loss, but more full of delight. I also learned this year that my delight grows, much like love and joy, when I share it. So this one is called, I'm gonna read the first one. This one's called My Birthday, Kinda. It's my 42nd birthday, and it would make perfect, if self-involved, sense to declare the day of my birth a delight, despite the many years I've almost puritanically paid no attention to it. A sad performance of a certain masculine nonchalance, non-flamboyance might have been, poor thing. Now it's all I can do not to bedeck myself in every floral thing imaginable. Today, both earrings and socks. Oh, and my drawers, hibiscus patterned with the coddling pocket in front to boot. And if there's some chance to wear some bright and clanging colors, believe me, some bit of healing for my old man, surely, who had warned us against wearing red, lest we succumb to some stereotype I barely even know. A delight that we can heal our loved ones, even the dead ones. Oh, broken, oh, beautiful. So let me first say, yes, mostly the day of my birth is an utter and unmitigated delight. And not only for the very sweet notes I sometimes get that day, already 5 by 8:15 a.m. from Taiwan, the Basque Country, Palo Alto, Bloomington, and Frenchtown, New Jersey, but also for the actual miracle of a birth. Not just the beautifully zany and alien and wet and odorous procedure that is called procreation, but for the many thousand, million accidents, no, impossibilities leading to our births. For God's sake, my white mother had never even met a Black guy. My father failed out of Central State, too busy looking good and having fun, so they say. Got drafted and was counseled by his old man to enlist in the Navy that day so as not to go where the Black and brown and poor kids go in the wars of America. And they both ended up, I kid you not, in Guam. Black man, white woman, the year of Loving versus Virginia on a stolen island in the Pacific, a staging ground for American expansion and domination. Come some babies, one of them me. Anyway, you get it. The older I get, in all likelihood closer to my death than to my birth, despite all the arugula and quinoa, the more I think of this day as a delight. But that's not today what I want to land on, if only because one's birthday is also the day of hollering many delights, if you can muster them, which today I can. This morning I was walking through Manhattan, head down, checking directions, when I looked up to see a fruit truck selling lychee, 2 pounds for $5, and I had $10 in my pocket. Then while buying my bus ticket for later that evening, I witnessed the Transbridge teller's face soften after she had endured a couple unusually rude interactions in front of me as I kept eye contact and thanked her. She called me honey first, delight, baby second, delight, and almost smiled before I turned away. On my way to the Flatiron building, there was an aisle of Coosa dogwood trees, looking parched, but still, the prickly knobs of their fruit were nestled beneath the leaves. A cup of coffee from a well-shaped cup. A fly, its wings hauling all the light in the room, landing on the porcelain handle as if to say, notice the precise flare of this handle, as though designed for the romance between the thumb and index finger that holding a cup can be. Or the peanut butter, salty and nut. Or the light blue bike the man pushed through the lobby. Or the top knot of the barista. Or the sweet glance of the man in his stylish short pants, well-lotioned ankles gleaming beneath, walking 2 little dogs. Or the woman stepping in and out of her shoe, her foot curling up and stretching out and curling up. This is called the high five from strangers, etc. Today I was wandering the square of the small Indiana town where I gave a poetry reading at the local college, a feature of the small town Midwest, a city hallish building in the center, always with some sad statue trumpeting one war or another. This one had a guy in one of those not very protective looking hats they called a helmet during World War I. He's carrying, naturally, a gun. Jenna Osman's book, Public Figures, alerted me to the ubiquity of the gun, the weapon, in the hands of our statues. A delight I wish to now imagine and even impose, given that beneficent dictatorship of one's own life anyway, is a delight. All new statues must have in their hands flowers, or shovels, or babies, or seedlings, or chinchillas. We could go on like this for a while. But never again, never ever guns. I decree it, and I also decree the removal of the already extant guns. Let the emptiness our war heroes carry be the metaphor for a while. As I was finishing circling the square, I passed a storefront garage with huge Make America Great Again signs. It was a foreign auto repair shop, and inside were mostly Toyotas and Hondas. I settled into the coffee shop, took my notebooks out, and I was reading over these delights, transcribing them into my computer. And while I was working, headphones on, swaying to the new De La Soul record, Delight, which deserves its own entry, I noticed a white girl. She looked 15, but she could have been, I suppose, a college student, standing next to me with her hand raised. I looked up, confused, pulled my headphones back, and she said, like a coach or something, "Working on your paper? Good job to you, high five." You better believe I high-fived that child in her pre-ripped Def Leppard shirt and her itty-bitty Doc Martens. For I delight in unequivocally pleasant public physical interactions with strangers. What constitutes pleasant? It's no secret. It's informed by my large-ish male and cisgender body. A body that is also large-ish male, cisgender, and not white. In other words, the pleasant, the delightful are not universal. We should all understand this by now. A few months ago, walking down the street in Umbertide, in Italy, a trash truck pulled up beside me and the guy in the passenger seat yelled something I didn't understand. I said, "Como?" the Spanish word for come again, which is a ridiculous thing to say because even if he had come again, I would not have understood him. He knew this, and hopping out of the truck to dump in a couple cans, he flexed his muscles, pointed at me, and smacked my biceps hard, twice. I loved him. Or when a waitress puts her hand on my shoulder, forget it if she calls me honey, baby, even better. Or someone scooting by puts their hand on my back, the handshake, the hug, I love them all. Once I was getting on a plane and shuffling down the aisle, I saw sitting at the front of coach, reading a magazine, my great Uncle Earl. I got down on my knees and put my hand on his forearm and I said, "Uncle Earl, it's me, Ross." He looked at me kind of quizzically, as did the woman traveling with him, who did not look one bit like my Aunt Sylvia, which made me look back at my not Uncle Earl, who looked maybe like my Uncle Earl's second cousin about 20 years ago. And though it was benign and no one was hurt, it was a little weird, and they looked confused. All the same, given his Uncle Earl died about 6 months later, I'm delighted I got to see him and touch him gently, lovingly, about 1,000 miles away. This one's called Nicknames. So, and I refer to this machine called a letterpress. A letterpress is an old-timey printing press. And I talk about a Chandler and Price letterpress. Nicknames. I'm writing in a notebook with the words, "Pay attention," printed on the front, which is a cousin to another notebook in my bag with the words, "Pay attention, motherfucker," printed on a Chandler and Price letterpress that I co-own with my friend, which I have yet to see, for it is lodged in a print shop down in Lubbock, Texas. My beloved co-owner pal, which makes him a kind of spouse, I suppose, who gifted me these delightful notebooks, is named Boogie, or Bugs, and was so named by me, one of my greatest literary achievements. Boogie, or Bugs, might not be the first name you'd assign to Boogie, or Bugs, for a number of reasons. Perhaps the most significant of which is that he has definitely not spent a lot of time dancing, boogieing, which you might ascertain from his appearance, which would be a wrong thing to do, though you'd be right. This is one of the reasons Boogie, or Bugs, is such a great nickname. It's a kind of curveball that has, with much repetition, become utterly natural. And his Christian name, Curtis, has come to seem awkward and clunky, kind of Lutheran, kind of curt. It's a clothesline of a name, really, the football kind. Another reason I love this nickname and have now come to love how much I love this nickname is because Boogie doesn't know that every time I say his name, I am also invoking the great and similarly nicknamed L Boogie, or Lauryn Hill, whom I am guessing wrongly, probably rightly, Boogie has never boogied to. Boogie calls me salpicon, which he tells me means sizzle, which I think fits. Though it would be a safe assumption, given my own delight, that the nickname salpicon might afford Boogie some similarly pleasurable ironic association, which I don't need to know about. I've shortened my nickname to Picon, whatever that means. Anyway, I love nicknames. They delight me. There are, evidently, people from whom nicknames are repelled like projectiles from Luke Cage's skin, fried eggs to Teflon. My friend Patrick is one of them. Though the simple Spanishification of his name, Patricio, time to time, among some of us, is one that has endured, sort of, time to time. Drop the pa, jiggle the spelling, and it might be a good sticky name, Tricio. One that in a generation or two might become associated incorrectly and beautifully, and so correctly, with something arboreal, something to do with trees. How delightful is that? I'm a bit of a nickname magnet and have been assigned the following aliases: Bizquick, Biz, Raheem, the compassionate, Beef, Beefy, Big Man, Biggs, Biggie, Big Lil Big, Big Papa, the Big Gay, Bones, Baby Boy, Baby Gay, the Baby, Booger, Beast, Sammy, Saucy, Saucy, Sauce, Saucy Pants, Dr. Sauce, Dr. Hot Sauce, Doc, the Doctor, Tall Lady, Tall Drink, Wave, Autos con Pollo, Ross the Boss, the King of Applesauce, Roski, Snozzer, Six, Sace, Unky, Daddy, and several others too lewd or private to share. I don't know exactly what nicknames mean, though a quick reading of mine and the abundance of the B sound, that babiest of sounds, makes me think it might be primal. I know that I rarely call the people I love by their names. I call them, if it's okay with them, by the name that I've given them. I wonder if this means I think of my beloveds as my children. That seems kind of patronizing, especially because I mostly don't give them money. But on the other hand, how lovely are my mothers. All my babies. This one's called Umbrella in the Cafe. I'm on my way to New Brunswick for a reading and decided to stop in Jersey City at a bakery on Jersey Avenue called Chacopan with croissants and quiche that smelled so good as I walked in this morning. I closed my eyes and reached out like I was falling. This place is kitty corner to a place called Nicole's, a West Indian joint where they have the very best roti I have ever eaten. And when I stopped in yesterday on my way into New York to get one, the owner, Nicole, said to me, I was just thinking about you on Sunday. Had she not added Sunday, the cynic in me might have thought she was just being a good business person. But that Sunday made it precise and kind of holy, like maybe she was praying for me. And however it was, I flitted through Nicole's mind, a little butterfly, a little flutterby, delights me, given the cancer she has been afflicted with these past several years, how beautiful and dark she looked, like maybe she'd gone home for a few weeks, I wondered. In the bakery, let me interrupt myself to acknowledge how often thus far in my journey of delight, a food or food type establishment and experience is the occasion of a delight, that it might form a kind of atlas or map of delights, which is a very good idea for a book, perhaps a companion book to this one, The Map of Delights. I was sitting here reading the poet C.D. Wright's last book, which I love and mourn its being the last one, always the last one. And where I am sitting, with my legs crossed, I am long-leggedly tall, and sometimes it's a puzzle where to put my legs. My right foot, in a now very large-seeming red sneaker, is in the path of every single person who walks in the door and out the door, which makes for a lanky and regular semi-distraction from the page. The proximity, the negotiation, the closeness also means many contacts, again and again, as I bob my big red foot down, but briefly, so as not to catch a cramp in my hamstring or calf, which would be dangerous. A guy on his way out, after buying his Americano and scooting by my big red bobbing foot and smiling softly at me and me at him, looked at the drizzle through the big plate glass window, put his coffee down, opened his umbrella, put it over his head, picked up his coffee, then realized, I presume, that he was still inside this bakery. The window was very clean. I saw him giggle to himself, realizing, I think, what he had done. Let me interrupt myself to mention that a man with a sack of some sort slung over his shoulder just entered Chacopan and exclaimed, "Good morning, Jersey City family." And then the man lowered his umbrella and walked quickly out with a smirk that today I read as a smirk of gentleness, of self-forgiveness. Do you ever think of yourself late to your meeting, or peed your pants some, or sent the private email to the group, or had a crazy dream, or burned the soup, or ordered your cortado with your fly down, or snot on your face, or opened your umbrella in the bakery as the cutest little thing? This is called Just a Dream. I referenced this writer and essayist, sort of the father, someone who's considered the father of the essay in some ways. It's named Montaigne, is how you say it. It's spelled like Montaigne. Just a Dream. Among the many things I have learned from Montaigne, I'm a little surprised I just wrote that, is that the word essay, which I already knew means attempt or try, also means trial. I gleaned this from one of the essays, Trials, in the Penguin Classics edition I scooped from a used bookstore. I'm not sure where. It's in the one called On Books, which is on books. Titling for Montaigne, I'm guessing, was not a trial. It's a nice and sometimes brutally honest assessment of what I imagine was the canon, the literary canon of his day, some of which remains in the canon of ours: Plato, Cicero, Virgil. He might mention Homer, Seneca. He finds both Cicero and Plato to be dull and long-winded, spending too much plodding time getting to their points. Virgil he adores and thinks his Georgics the finest poem ever written. I love the Georgics too, so it pleases me to know I'm in good company that way. But I don't think Montaigne would like this essay, as it has only been warm-up. Maybe everything is always only warm-up. One of the great delights of my life, when I get to do it, is staring into the ceiling or closet from my bed, or looking at the slats of light coming into the room, or the down of dust hovering on the blinds, recalling my dreams. Sometimes they are prominent and clear, like last night when I was to be Hillary Clinton's vice president. I was still me and was writing something on the board in a classroom where I was teaching a class, thinking to myself, she's got the wrong guy. I'm not cut out for this. I was thinking of my tendency toward panic and paranoia, and how that might not be suitable for someone who's second in command. Though I gave her a big hug for being the first female nominee, the first female president, congratulating her and silently thinking, how can I get out of it? Which is maybe one of the themes, not the primary one by any stretch of the imagination, of my dream life. How can I get out of this? Which explains all the airplanes falling from the sky, the tornadoes brewing in the distance, the plays in which I have the lead but haven't studied the lines, and the last football games I'm supposed to get to but can't, stuck in traffic in my uniform. A few years ago, I had a dream in which I had been fucking my mother for about 2 years. Thankfully, I didn't actually dream through the fucking part, but instead just woke up in the dream to the fact that for the past 2 years, is 2 a significant number? I had been fucking my mother. Just as you would if you just realized you had been fucking your mother for the past 2 years, I lost my goddamn shit. I was pacing around, hyperventilating, thinking, how could I have been fucking my mother for the past 2 years? Mind you, this wasn't an Oedipal faux pas, which, as far as I'm concerned, is completely forgivable and understandable. He was fucked from the start, and the blind man said so. As I recall, in the dream, maybe my mother and I were to meet up later, or she was on her way over, a date, when it occurred to me that something, fucking my mother for the past 2 years, was not okay. What have I done? What have I done? I thought. In writing this, I will commend myself for not, in the dream, blaming my poor mother, my dear mother, who was also a party to the depravity. I've had other terrible dreams. The one where I murdered someone and then invited people over, Super Bowl, the severed head sitting behind the chair as we chatted over root beer. And other terrible fucking dreams too, of course. But you might imagine that none of them was as terrible as the one where I'd been fucking my mother for 2 years. And very few things have been as delightful as when I woke from that dream, let out a groan, shook off the grossness and shouted, thank you, to no one but me. That's a fun one to read. I'm going to read you this essay called Marfa Lights, the Marfa Lights. So Marfa is a place in Texas. It's a little town that they have kind of an artist residency. So I was staying in Marfa, me and my buddy Pat, for about a month. This is back in 2018 or something. And no, 2017. And anyway, so the Marfa Lights is a phenomenon that happens in the sky. And probably one of these, there's just lights that show up in the night sky out there. But I'm talking about a little basketball game. The Marfa Lights. My buddy Pat and I went to shoot around at the courts here in Marfa today. We were warming up, shooting 12-footers or doing slow spin moves and crossovers, when a young guy from the other side of the court swaggered toward us, holding a ball on his hip, the light gleaming in his earrings, and challenged us to a 2-on-2, pointing his thumb to himself and back to his buddy, draining threes from the corner. We agreed and went on to kick the shit out of them, 21-0. That is a horrible figure of speech, and I leave it in only to expose the violence we so easily say. We got more baskets than they did. That they were only 12 years old is irrelevant, given as this was their home court. And they even had a crowd watching. Another little girl who, when one of the kids shouted to the gods, they're kicking our butts, said, I hope so, they're grown men. This is called loitering. Loitering. I'm sitting at a cafe in Detroit where in the door window is a sign with the commands, no soliciting, no loitering, stacked like an anvil. I have a fiscal relationship with this establishment, which I developed by buying a coffee, and which makes me a patron. And so even though I subtly dozed in the late afternoon sun pouring under the awning, the $2 spent protects me, at least temporarily, from the designation of loiterer. Though the dozing, if done long enough or ostentatiously enough, or with enough delight, might transgress me over. Loitering, as you know, means fucking off or doing jack shit or jacking off. And given that 2 of those 3 terms have sexual connotations, it's no great imaginative leap to know that it is a repressed and repressive, sexual and otherwise, culture, at least, which invented and criminalized the concept. Someone reading this might very well keel over considering loitering a concept and not a fact. Such are the gales of delight. The Webster's definition of loiter reads thus: to stand around or wait idly without apparent purpose, and to travel indolently with frequent pauses. Among the synonyms for this behavior are linger, loaf, laze, lounge, lollygag, dawdle, amble, saunter, meander, putter, dilly-dally, and mosey. Any one of these words in the wrong frame of mind might be considered critique or noun epithet. You lollygagger, or stop loafing, loafer. Indeed, lollygag is one of the words my mom would use to cajole us while jingling her keys when she was waiting on us, which, judging from the visceral response I had while writing that memory, must have been not quite infrequent. All of these words to me imply having a nice day. They imply having the best day. They also imply being unproductive, which leads to being, even if only temporarily, non-consumptive. And this is a crime in America, and more explicitly criminal depending upon any number of quickly apprehended visual cues. For instance, the darker your skin, the more likely you are to be loitering. Though a Patagonia jacket could do some work to disrupt that perception. A Patagonia jacket, colorful pants, tree-torn sneakers with short socks, an Ivy League ball cap, and a thick book, not the Bible, and you're almost golden. Almost. There is a Venn diagram someone might design, several of them, that will make visual our constant internal negotiation towards safety. And like the best comedy, it will make us laugh hard before saying, Lord. It occurs to me that laughter and loitering are kissing cousins, as both bespeak an interruption of production and consumption. And it's probably for this reason that I have been among groups of non-white people laughing hard who have been shushed in a Qdoba in Bloomington, in a bar in Fishtown, in the Harvard Club at Harvard. The shushing, perhaps, reminds how threatening to the order are our bodies in non-productive, non-consumptive delight. The moment of laughter not only makes consumption impossible, you might choke, but if the laugh is hard enough, if the shit talk is just right, food or drink might fly from your mouth. If not, then this kind of hurts, your nose. And if your body is supposed to be one of the consumables, if it is one of the consumables around which so many ideas of production and consumption have been structured in this country, well, there you go. There's a Carrie Mae Weems photograph of a woman in what looks to be some kind of textile factory with an angel embroidered to the left breast of her shirt, where her heart resides. The woman, like the angel, has her arms splayed wide, almost in ecstasy, as though to embrace everything. So in the midst of her glee is she. Every time I see that photo, after I smile and have a genuine bodily opening on account of witnessing this delight, which is a moment of Black delight, I look behind her for the boss. Uh-oh, I think. You're in a moment of non-productive delight, heads up. which points to another of the synonyms for loitering, which I almost wrote as delight, taking one's time. For while the previous list of synonyms allude to time, taking one's time makes it kind of plain. For the crime of loitering, the idea of it is about ownership of one's own time, which must be sometimes wrested from the assumed owners of it, who are not you, to the rightful, who is. And while having interpolated the policing of the light such that I am on the lookout for the overseer, even in photos I have studied hundreds of times, on the lookout always for the policer of delight, my work is studying this kind of glee, being on the lookout for it and aspiring to it, floating away from the factory as she seems to be. This is called Reading Poems. As I was passing through airport security this morning, the young man at the giant X-ray machine, waving me through, made an appropriately appreciative observation of my socks and the person's socks before mine. And using my detective skills here, I determined probably lots of people's socks throughout his shift. Anyhow, to me, he said about the floral design on my socks, "You have roses on your feet," before turning back to the screen to see if and where he had to pat me down. His banter, which he kept up like a mantra, "Roses on your socks, roses on your feet," betrayed his shyness when I looked over my shoulder to see the groin region on my video game likeness lit up. He walked me over to what was supposed to be a room, and was, though it was a room made of clear plexiglass with no discernible obstruction of sight, by which I mean privacy, which the forthcoming search, puritanically speaking, might have longed for. The plexiglass room, a short walk from the pat-down holding pen just outside the spaceship X-ray room, actually exacerbated the publicness of what would be my not quite handjob. He offered, stammeringly, non-committally, without a hint of eye contact, his obligation, which was an odd kind of consent. "I am consenting to fill you up with the backs of my gloved hands," which he held up to me, both of them, "all the way up the inside of your inseam," he said, palms facing himself, as though to reify the friendly distance, the pure utility of the massage. As he was filling me up, he asked me where I was going. I told him I was going to go read poems in Syracuse, which made him look up from his work, which he was kneeling to do. And he said enthusiastically, if a little quizzically, "You must be good at that if they fly you around to do it." I was feeling good about myself as we finished. I guess he finished, and walked me toward the hand swiping wand, rubbing it along my palms and plugging it into the machine they say detects explosives, but obviously connects DNA for future cloning. He then told me about his mother taking him to have his poems read, which made us even closer than we already were. He was talking about longer lines and shorter ones, and some broken ones, all of which, admittedly, I was distracted from, given as I was cutting it close, checking my watch and listening for the boarding call. "I never believed in it myself, but I know some people do," he said, dismissing me at last, and I laughed and nodded, overhearing him saying to one of his colleagues as I jogged toward the gate, "Hey, Mike, that guy's being flown to Syracuse to read poems." The sanctity of trains. I'm going to read two more. The sanctity of trains. Something I've noticed riding on Amtrak trains, like the one I'm on right now between Syracuse and Manhattan, is that people leave their bags unattended for extended periods of time. Maybe they go to the end of the car to use the bathroom, or sometimes they go to the far end of the train to the cafe, which smells vomity like microwave cheese. My neighbor on this train, across the aisle and up one row, disappeared for a good 20 minutes, her bag wide open, a computer peeking out. Not that I was checking. She is not unusual in this flaunting of security, otherwise known as trust, on the train. Nearly everyone participates in this practice of trust, and without recruiting a neighbor across the aisle to keep an eye on my stuff while I use the restroom, which seems to be a coffee shop phenomenon. Trusting one's coffee shop neighbor, but not the people in line, etc. I suppose, given the snugness of a train, especially if it's full, one might speculate there's a kind of eyes on the streetness at play. Although it seemed to me this morning when I was first leaving my valuables on my seat for pilfering, my laptop and cell phone glittering atop my sweatshirt and scarf, most everyone was sleeping, and so provided little, if any, eyewitness deterrent. I suppose I could spend time theorizing how it is that people are not bad to each other, but that's really not the point. The point is that in almost every instance of our lives, our social lives, we are, if we pay attention, in the midst of an almost constant, if subtle, caretaking, holding open doors, offering elbows at crosswalks, letting someone else go first, helping with the heavy bags, reaching what's too high or what's been dropped, pulling someone back to their feet, stopping at the car wreck at the struck dog. The alternating merge, also known as the zipper. This caretaking is our default mode, and it's always a lie that convinces us to act or believe otherwise. Always. And I'm going to read this one more, and then we can wrap up. Today, I was walking through Washington Square Park, bundled up against, thank God, a seasonably cold day for once. And after a brief conversation with the Dosa man who told me to come back in an hour, I noticed a guy whose back faced me with a pigeon for a head. When I looked closer, a touch alarmed, I realized he actually just had a pigeon on his shoulder. Closer still, and I saw that the pigeon was whispering into his ear, not wobbling at all on the slick north base perch. And closer still, it's called gawking, yes. Revealed simply this guy feeding the pigeon, the bird dipping its head into the hand the man must have been holding very near his own face. So that the feeding was not only kind of romantic, but alluded to that original feeding the bird experienced, a mother dropping masticated victuals into the bird's mouth, which is, after all, the first romance. It looked like so many things, I'm realizing, writing this. In some way, the two looked to be dancing, slow dancing, swaying, turning almost imperceptible circles, oblivious to the handful of park dwellers in a semicircle of benches around them, enjoying the sun. God damn, I thought, walking through the giant arch onto Fifth Avenue. God damn, how often do you get to see someone slow dancing with a pigeon? And not 30 seconds later, walking toward 8th, giggling at my good fortune, a tufted titmouse swooped by my head, landing on a wrought iron gate, upon which a pedestrian walking past me immediately pulled from her snazzy jacket pocket a baggie of crumbs. And the bird hopped directly into her hand, nuzzling the goodies intermittent with tweeting toward its new pal. The bird and woman both nodding at me, gawking at them, smiling at my bafflement, as though to say, we're everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. We have some students in the room that would like to ask you some questions, and we'll just go by hands. If you have a question, will you just raise your hand and let me know? And I can bring you a mic and you can ask him a question. I have a teacherly kind of question that I want to ask you.
Okay, yeah, great.
I'll go first. Can you talk a little bit about your book as an intersection or a hybrid of poetry and essays, and talk about how you think about the difference between this book, say, and your other books?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. When I first started reading these essays out, when I'd be given readings, I was describing them as essays from the start, but people were hearing them as prose poems often. And a prose poem is just a kind of poem that looks like, you know, prose, looks like in paragraphs. And I think they were probably thinking that in part because they know me as a poet. You know, I had written 3 books of poems. and that's it. But then I think there's this other thing about a certain kind of attention to language, maybe that I'd learned as a poet, which is like a kind of sometimes a very densely musical kind of language that might be a little bit different often than nonfiction. So in a way, I sort of feel like, the way I'm answering your question is maybe a little bit, it's sort of touching your question and also to the side of it, is that I feel like I come to writing essays as a poet. So I come with a certain kind of training or understanding or practice at a certain kind of meticulousness, and also maybe a certain capacity or interest in jumping around, leaping, metaphor that might extend a little bit further than we typically think of not the essay as doing, So I might have a little bit more tolerance or patience for, or interest in actually jumping very far, very quickly, the way that a poem will do. Which to me, sometimes you might call that a digression, or sometimes you might call that a leap, or an association. But that's one of the things that is really interesting to me about writing, but it's also really interesting to me about people. Like when you're having a conversation with someone, how often they will jump very far away in the middle of a conversation, just as the way that we orient in the world. It's just, we are not linear creatures. We are fragments that try very hard, it seems to me, to keep it together as a linear thing. But the fact of the matter is that for the most part, metaphors are bouncing off us constantly. Yeah.
Did you, when you started writing the book, did you envision it as essays? Did you envision it ended up as poetry? What was your thinking kind of before you started writing?
Yeah, great question. It was like literally when I read that preface, but the way it came to me, like I was having this really amazing day, this beautiful day, and I was just walking and I was walking from having a couple of espressos, so I was probably like buzzed up on some espressos, and I'm walking up back to this. I was at what's called a writing retreat or an artist residency, literally at a castle. It was literally at a castle in Italy, which is cool in itself, but even cooler is that they cook for you, and they cook really good, there's all this stuff, like they cook really good vegan food for me. And because I was like a big boy, like, the cooks, they were like, and I was like, man, this food's the best. They would like want to cook me more. So I'd like be going to incredible meals. So I'm walking back to this really incredible, abundant meal in a castle that is paid for. So, whatever, I'm having a nice time. It's easy to be delighted. That's what I'm saying. I'm sort of in a little rarefied spot. But I thought, I should write a little essay about this delight, this moment of delight. I'm walking back to what's sure to be a really delicious meal. There's like sunflowers all over, like the birds are singing, like, it's like a little perfect little day. And then boom, it flew to me into my ear. Do it every day for a year. I think I probably understood that doing it every day for a year would not be like, not every day is walking to where you're about to get a really delicious meal and have it paid for and everything else, and the flowers all talking to you. So that's kind of how the book actually happened. But it came very quickly to know to do it as prose, as an essay, as essays. Partly, I kind of wonder if this is the reason, because I don't know that I could actually write a poem every day. And I know that there are people who write poems every day. And like Sylvia Plath was a poet who I think wrote and finished a poem every day, had a certain kind of practice like that. And I know poets who write at poems every day. But there was something maybe about my relationship to the essay, which was like one of like, I didn't know how to write essays. I'd written a handful, I've written plenty of essays, but not a ton. So I didn't actually have expectations. And then I lowered the bar even further by saying, you have to do it in 30 minutes, So I gave myself the 3 rules, and the rules were to do them every day, write them by hand, and write them in 30 minutes. So by lowering the bar, I was even like going to be less expert at this form that I'm not at all expert at. So I think there was something about actually the expectations were very low. For me, the expectations were low with essays, so it made it more possible. But my poems, because I have written a lot of poems, and I know I quote unquote know how to do that in a certain kind of way. And I know that doing that well is long, and sometimes it takes 4 years to write a poem. It didn't even occur to me to think of doing a poem every day about something that delighted me. It didn't even cross my mind. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Here.
What gave you the push to start writing professionally for the first time?
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great question. I don't know exactly how to answer that. I feel like when I was in college, actually, I was my first 2 years of college, I was sort of like right on the brink of failing out. I was not much of a student. I came to play football where I went to college, and that wasn't going well. I was probably what you'd call depressed. I was like, deeply bummed out, and maybe depressed. And I had a teacher who had me give a presentation on a poet named Amiri Baraka, who is a really important poet to me and remains a really important poet. And kind of at that moment, I thought, oh, this is something I would like to do. I would like to write poems. Like his poems changed my life. And I thought, oh, I would like to do something like that. And then I started reading and writing poems in a very serious way. I don't know if I thought that it was something that I could do for a living right away, or when that came to appear possible. So one of the things is that, that's such a great question, because it's a complicated question. It's a really complicated question. Like at that point, and maybe before, like I for a long time been sort of artistically-ish inclined, but it wasn't necessarily what anyone else would call that. Like even when I was like a kid being bad or like doing stuff, in retrospect, I know I was sort of, I was performing, or I was like doing theater in a way, or I was like messing around in artistic ways. But when I realized, I want to write poems in a very serious way, I don't know if I was thinking I would make a living at it. And part of the thing about poets is most poets don't make a living at writing poems. And so the first time that I actually wrote in such a way that I was like, oh, I could maybe make a living at this, was actually when I started writing essays. The Book of Delights is actually the first book that I kind of got a check for, So mostly people write books of poems, and they might, probably an average book of poems sells 500 copies maybe, which means you don't get a check. you just have some books. You have a couple readings at the bookstore, at the coffee shop, and then my third book did really well. But really well for a book of poems is nothing like what really well for a book of essays or a nonfiction book or a novel is. So I wonder if when I started, actually now I know, there was a time when I realized that teaching, now I teach college at Indiana University, and I like teaching. I love teaching, in fact. But I wasn't loving it at that moment. And I was like, I got to figure out how to make enough money that I could live as a writer. And it was about 2012. And I made a plan. And part of that plan was to start writing nonfiction. So I'm going to say, actually, to learn how to, like some poets who make a living as writers, they're actually teachers. So we make a living as teachers, But in 2012, when I was thinking about not teaching anymore, that's when I started thinking, I want to figure out how to make a living as a writer. And that was actually the time when I said, I'm going to start working on my essays. So it was in 2012. Actually, there's an answer to your question. It took me a long time to get there. Thank you for your patience. Sure.
I have a student who wants to know if any of your essayettes were made into longer essays or poems themselves, or any other type of project.
Yeah, good question. It's funny, like there's 2 essays in there called Joy is Such Human Madness, I think, or Joy is Such Human, which is a riff on a Zadie Smith essay. And the book that is coming out I have a book coming out in October. It's called Inciting Joy. It's completely a kind of expansion of consideration of of those joy essays, actually. It's funny. I hadn't quite thought of it like that, but that's exactly what it is. Those essays feel like they sort of start this contemplation of joy. And this book kind of goes at it for another 250 or 300 pages, you know? So yeah, that does happen. I'm trying to think if any of them turned into poems or got continued as poems. Not that I can think of. But it's also partly it's a good question as well, because it reminds me that everything I write, whether it gets published in a book or whether it just stays in a notebook, is always, always, always practice for something else. It's always practice for something else, you know? So even what we think of as not good, you know, guaranteed you learned something from writing it, you know? That's at 47 years old with 5 or 6 books now, I can say that is my experience. Everything I write is a little bit of practice for something. And it might in fact be the kernel for something, you know, really important.
Question over here.
What was the biggest challenge you faced with writing a new story every day?
You know, for the most part, it was just, you know, if I had time to do it, I could do like 3 or 4 of them. Some days I would just, because you know, if you just kind of having a nice day, you're walking, you know, going to the gym or like going to get a coffee or like, you know, messing around the garden, or if I didn't have like work that day for particularly, if I could loiter, actually, boom. There was just constantly, because I'd be like sitting around and I'm like, man, I love the cardinal. I love the bird of the cardinal. And let me just think about the cardinal for a minute. Or let me just think about, you know, the way that I love those crossing guards. Like crossing guards are amazing, you know? Like, let me just think about these things. So the biggest actually difficulty, and because I didn't write them every single day, there were probably like, you know, I probably wrote about 270 of them, 280 out of 365 days. One of the hardest things, mostly it was about time. It was almost never about being able to find something that delighted me. Even in the most difficult days, I found that, you know, whatever, like that my heartbreak or my rage or whatever didn't, for the most part, make it impossible for me to also be like, and at the same time, here's this dude feeding the bird on his shoulder in the park. Like, that's crazy. That's delightful. You know, so I could still like, and I think part of that is to say that the practice of doing it, the practice of noting what delighted me, made me more capable of being delighted while also having all these other emotions, you know? So yeah, that's a great question.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So writing the book, publishing it in 2019, obviously the last couple of years have been a little bit, have not been joyful in a lot of ways in the last couple of years because of COVID. Do you think your book intersected with the pandemic era in a way that made your book resonate even more?
Well, it is an interesting thing, you know, because some people, they came to it after, in 2020, you know, and I think some people didn't quite know that it was published like a year prior. Like it had been out already for a year or two by the time they came to it. And in some way, I think that's the case. Like it sort of was, you know, there was a kind of need for, you know, in the midst of things, being able to attend to still what was delightful. Which was interesting to me, you know, because I was sort of like, oh, this is new to you. This is a new book to you. You know, I'd be on like being interviewed on a radio show or something, and someone would say, your new book. And I'd say, no, this is 2 years old, you know, but it filled a certain kind of need, I think, you know, to attend to not grand things that were, you know, bringing one delight in the midst of profound sorrow, you know, which in my opinion is like what is being alive. You know, I don't think we're ever out of profound sorrow. My experience is that I'm never out of profound sorrow. That's like one of the things about being an adult is that, you know, my heartbreak only has different sort of shades and but it doesn't go away. And I don't know that it diminishes either. It's there, it's steady. And it's primarily there maybe because like creatures, we're only here for a little amount of time, and we suffer. And that's a kind of baseline experience that, you know, as yet it's still like, you know, makes my heart feel a certain kind of way. So in a way it feels like, yeah, the project of sort of in the midst of your delight, in the midst of your sorrow, in the midst of your heartbreak, which is more or less acute, of course, but my experience is that it's always there. How do we still attend to what it is that delights us? Or how in the midst of our delight, or how in the midst of our heartbreak, do we actually care for one another? How do we reach toward each other in the midst of our, you know, heartbreak, which may be mutual, which may be the same heartbreak and may not be the same heartbreak, but it's heartbreak, you know? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ross. We really appreciate the time that you've shared with us today. We really appreciated getting to read your work. I want to thank everybody for coming today and coming to the event. I want to announce just briefly, we'll be back here in the fall with poet Eve Ewing and her book, Electric Arches, which will be our reading for next semester. And thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. Thanks a lot.